Hello and welcome to the Turn by Turn podcast. I am Daniel Canto McGarr, joined with Chris Nihil Harkey to talk about Radiant Dawn. Chris, what's up?
Not much. I've been looking forward to recording this episode so much.
So Chris has been writing notes for this episode for the last 2.5 years, so he's going to be running point on this one, and I will chime in periodically to let you know I'm still on the recording. So Chris, take it away.
Sure. So I figured I'd start with our experience with this game. I got it pretty close to when it came out. My parents got it for me for Christmas one year, and it took me a while to actually get around to playing it. But once I finally did, I distinctly remember it's divided into parts, which is not a thing really in any other Fire Emblem game. Where there's like each part has its own prologue and epilogue and feels almost like a standalone game. But I remember reaching the end of part one and being like, that was great. I guess that's it. And then to my shock, it keeps going. And there's more of the game there. So what was your final reason to play this, Daniel, since you discovered it later in life?
So my interest in this game goes back, wow, it's hard to tabulate the time, but it's probably been about 2 whole months since I played this game. And it was out, I finished Path of Radiance, and then I went right to Radiant Dawn. So all of the story beats were like fresh in my head. So upon starting, I knew that the game was broken down into multiple different parts with different characters available in each part. But what I didn't know, and this is just me being an idiot / not fully looking up spoilers, was that you go back to groups of characters. So in part one, I lost like almost everybody and didn't think it was a big deal because I was done with that part of the story. So in the final battle, I had sacrificed like 10 people thinking I wouldn't have to bother with them again.
Ah.
So as the game continued and I circled back to the part one characters, I had like 5 of them per battle.
Yeah, that's not great.
No. So I had looked it up that there were different parts, but I didn't fully spoil myself enough to know that you returned to the parts. I thought it sort of wrapped up the narrative and then you moved on to the next chunk of characters.
I see. Well, I'm glad you didn't fully look up spoilers. I think it's better that way.
Because normally I don't care about spoilers. I'm happy to know everything, but just perhaps in your honor, since this is one of your favorite games, I went spoiler light.
Awesome.
But I went so light that I ended up making the game probably like 7 times harder for myself.
And that is a great segue to major spoilers inbound, because I'm going to take us through an abridged version of the story, and I thought the best way to tackle this one was just to sort of go in order. So, are you ready?
Yep.
All right, that's your spoiler warning. I highly recommend you play both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn before you listen to this one, because it is, as Daniel said, one of my favorite games of all time. And it is my favorite Fire Emblem when combined with Path of Radiance. So, with all that out of the way, our story begins 3 years after Path of Radiance ends. Crimea is victorious in the war. Dane is falling into ruin, as it's now ruled by the occupying forces of the Binyan Empire. This is great, since Crimea and Binyan were the heroes of Path of Radiance, and Dane were the villains. So the surprise, though, obviously if you played it, is that you play as a small resistance force called the Dawn Brigade, who are actually Dane people, and fight back against these occupying forces. It's led by the character Nolan in name, but he never really acts like it, and usually defers to Micaiah, the girl with silver hair who can see the future, and her good friend Soth, a young man who fought with Ike in the previous war. So, I figured we'd go in parts. So, start of part one, which is called the Silver-Haired Maiden. The Dawn Brigade fights occupying forces. That's the main thing. Lots of politics. Let's see. I'm trying to figure out how I can abridge this as best I can. So the Dawn Brigade fights occupying forces, and here's a rumor about Ashnard's son, the king from the first game. They realize that his son is a decent man, and they go try to find him. to instate him as the ruler of Dane. Stop me anytime you want to make a comment on this, because I'm very curious to what you were thinking.
So,
Go ahead. Sorry.
so the king's son, Ashnard's son, always felt like a little bit of a stretch.
Pellius?
Yes. Tellius was my least favorite part of the game. And maybe you'll sway me, but
Oh, I will, because there's a lot there.
okay.
But we'll get into that more as we go on. Sonichi, the Empress of Benyon, the religious empire, learns of the atrocities her occupying army is inflicting on the Dane people, and she orders them to stand down. Her senators don't like this. The leader of the army, Jared, decides to get his revenge anyway and tries to kill Micaiah, but she's saved by the Black Knight, who's still alive. How do we feel about the Black Knight still being alive?
I thought that was a good twist. I kind of liked the ending in his ending in Path of Radiance, but at first I wasn't on board, and then I got on board as the story continues, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Yes, we will. Micaiah spares Jared, who tries again before he's defeated, as the boss of Part 1, and Pellius is crowned as king. The Black Knight leaves. So I also think the Black Knight's a little bit weird that he's back, but he's cool enough that it honestly didn't bother me. I wanted to see more of him, and now I'm getting more. I get why some people think that that's too much, though. I think that in canon, like my headcanon at least, is he has that teleporting powder, so he just uses that as the thing collapses in Path of Radiance, and that makes sense to me that he gets out, but the teleporting powder was also kind of dumb to begin with as a plot device.
Yep.
So our main cast from Path of Radiance didn't all stick together after the war. They went off and did things that were important to them. And to me, this kind of continues the trend of the whole world feeling like a living, breathing thing from Path of Radiance by having important things happen that you just are not privy to as the player. I don't like in games, I think I've said in some other episodes, where every single important thing that happens, you have to be present for. In this, it feels more like, well, you know, your perspective is in one part of the world, and you're not going to see everything because other things are going to keep happening, and it's just too much to all keep up with because you would have to literally be everywhere all the time. So I really like how everybody's changed a little bit and kept growing. It doesn't feel like Path of Radiance ended and then they waited for you, the player, to get back. To me, it felt like people were just living in the middle of living their lives. And in my notes, I wrote, they're not waiting around to be recruited by you. I love that they drop characters on you like Fiona, Ilyana, and Zyhark super early in the game that you may not have used in the previous game, but now you get the chance to kind of see them shine a little bit more. Everyone feels like they matter more, I think, in general, because now, you know, Zyhark has 2 games, Fiona has 2 games, Ilyana has 2 games, and so I can just get more of a relationship with these characters, and it makes me care about them even more in Path of Radiance as well. Anyway, I was going to say, I love the perspective shift. Soth views Ike as a great man and a great leader, which makes sense for him, but Micaiah calls him a hero, in quotes, as she views him more as Ike the Conqueror, which from her perspective, I think also makes sense. This whole other side of the war thing is a storytelling idea that I just can't get enough of. So I have my whole thing about that. So I'm going to just get through this as quick as possible. The last game, I hope you've listened to our last episode on Path of Radiance, where I talked about one of my favorite things is it asks the question, what if the Lagoos are people? And it has a lot of subtext about slavery and human suffering and things like that. But this game asks, what if the faceless soldiers you were killing were people? And it tackles an entirely different issue that I think is just as important and stems from a different kind of prejudice, but also a very similar one. It's about how there's always an other. As soon as people learn to start accepting the Lagoos, now they hate the people of Dane, and we have to face once again that our heroes did some bad things. Before, we had people like Shinon that we can easily say harbors resentment for the Lagoos based on their race, so he's bad. But now, those same faceless soldiers who actually do have names and thoughts and feelings feel that way about you and your heroic actions from the last game. And this is really what makes these games feel so deep to me and so special to me, that every character is both a hero and a villain to someone. And I think this is very true to life as well. I've also not played many other games or read many other books that talk about who the baddies are and admit that they were people with families, dreams, and desires all their own. So this is something that just really moves me. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that definitely comes across. I felt that it feels weird to, in one battle, be, this is obviously later on in the game, but in one battle be one army, and then in the next battle you're the other army trying to eliminate the people you just were. So
Mm-hmm.
it feels weird from the gameplay aspect of stat growth, because like you're
Yes.
raising up levels of one army, and then in the next battle you're trying to kill them. So it almost seems like, to adjust your gameplay, you don't want any of them to get too strong, because
Mm,
then you have to deal with that in the next battle.
I see.
So it becomes this weird balance of how you want to like negotiate stat growth and like character usage,
Mhm.
which I obviously didn't know about. I didn't know that you'd go back or that you'd even be fighting. So it creates a nice balance. But I think like the point you're making about like seeing war from other aspects is obviously more important than video game stat growth.
Maybe so. It
Maybe.
depends what you get out of it. To me, what I get out of the Tellius games is that I like the gameplay, but I'm very much here for the story.
Yep. And I think it also disappointed me that characters that I fell in love with from the first game were now in conflict with characters that I liked. So,
It's again true to life, though. You know, you make friends in other countries, you form alliances, and then sometimes those countries are not going to see eye to eye, and it's completely out of the control of everyone below that. But
yeah.
we get more into that too in part two. To wrap up our thoughts on part one, how did you feel about Jared as a boss?
Uh, Pretty unmemorable, honestly.
Okay. I thought he was one of the better ones in this game.
Interesting. Why is that?
I don't totally know. I think he just sticks with me more than some of the final bosses of the other parts.
I think it sort of like didn't play as well for me because it felt like that like persnickety like animated TV show villain where it's like, "Arr,
Yes,
I'm gonna get you.
he very
Oh,
much is. But
I'm gonna break the rules to get back at you guys. I'm a tough guy." Kind of
yeah,
like,
he very much is. But to me, it kind of shows that, sort of like I was saying with the Lagoos being subhuman in the last game, now Benyon kind of used Dane as subhuman, and it
mhm.
doesn't really matter what he does because these aren't people. You know, they're just there.
Yeah.
They're just an inconvenience that he has to manage. So it is very cartoonish, but I worry that we've seen similar things in real history, and so it kind of stands out to me, I think, for that reason. Let's jump into characters real quick, and we won't talk about every single one, but is there anybody, if you have the character list in front of you, from part one that just really stood out to you?
So, uh, Nolan stood out in that he didn't, because
I
he sort
see.
of presents as sort of like an Aragorn type, and
Yes.
he's just kind of like a dude that hangs out with a bunch of kids.
Yeah, doing some research for this episode, I totally forgot that Nolan actually runs the Dawn Brigade. I just thought it was Micaiah.
Yeah, me too.
Like he it just takes such a hard backseat.
Yeah. So, like, I felt weird that he was like included. Like, I get like having your Jagan character, but like, it just felt so out of place with the rest of the kids. Like 40-year-old guy hanging out with them. So that struck me as kind of weird. Obviously, loved having Tormod and Maorim back,
I remember you
and
liked them a lot in the last episode we did.
yep. And then I thought Nalia, probably not saying that
I
right.
say Nyla.
Nyla. Um, Seems like a really cool character. I loved her transformation. She was awesome.
Yes, I wrote. I love both the wolves. Volug and Nyla. People can make furry jokes all they want. The Lagoos are just cool. They were in the last game, they are in this game, and I will stand by that.
Soth made like literally no impression because he died in the battle I got him in the first game.
Oh no.
So I thought it was fun to have a useful version of him, and I thought his like battle animations were like really, really cool looking.
Yes, I love Soth as well. I also, my favorite from the last game, or one of them at least, Zyhark, shows up very early on in this game, so I really appreciated that. He gets a lot of mileage in this game. And then Aaron was also a standout for me.
Okay.
He just performed really well for me when I played the game. And then I was much younger when I fully played this game for the first time. And for some reason, I was like, I just need to make Edward good. And so I used Edward a ton and fed him tons of kills and actually like kind of built him. So that was a fun challenge.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Ready for part 2?
Oh, we have to bag on Meg for a second. Meg was terrible. That's all. We can go to part 2 now.
Yeah, Meg is stat-wise one of the worst characters in both games.
Like, she literally just ended up a human shield. But just to keep it going, we'll go to part 2.
All right. Part 2 of Countries and Kings. The nobles of Crimea start worrying that Dane will invade again now that the son of the Mad King has risen to power. Alencia, now the queen, is still seen as new and inexperienced, so the nobles dog her endlessly. She didn't do much in the 3 years to inspire confidence in them either, since she did the grotesque actions like promoting a dirty commoner like Ike to the nobility. Ike relinquishes his title to avoid causing problems, but the damage is already done for Alencia. A noble from the court, Count Ludwig, leads a rebellion against Queen Alencia's rule. Many more of our old friends return to oppose this rebellion, like Brahm and Nephany. Alencia sends her army, led by General Joffrey from Path of Radiance as well, to go seize Ludwig, but it's a ruse, and Ludwig's main force marches to attack Alencia directly, capturing Lucia as a hostage in the process. You have to play a massive defense battle with Alencia and her remaining retainers. How'd you feel about that battle?
That battle was probably my favorite battle in all of Fire Emblem, maybe.
Really?
That sounds kind of strong. I take it back, but
it is strong, but you still feel strongly about this one.
That was just such a great battle.
I thought so too.
Just to step back, I thought the cloud battle at the beginning with the two Pegasus Knights and what's his name? Nalucci.
Yes.
And then Har showing up and like sleeping his way through the battle. I thought that was like a very fun way to start off part 2 because all the battles are landlocked.
Fun to mix up. That's exactly what I was going to say. It's fun to mix up the setting. So I wrote for this one, I love giant castle maps normally, but it's rare that you're the one in possession of said castle at the start of the battle. So I think that's really fun.
Yep. They did a really good job.
All right. You ready to move on?
Yep.
All right, so anyway, Joffrey returns in time to save the day, but the rebels trot out some gallows and plan to hang Lucia, who also, I think, looks way better with short hair. Do you have an opinion on that?
Short hair gate. She looks good either way. They did a nice job creating that character.
I think so. I like the short hair a lot more. She doesn't cry. I said I love the speech Alencia gives to Ludwig here. She doesn't cry about things or blame others. She takes full responsibility for all her shortcomings, including letting this rebellion get as far as it has. And she instead doubles down on being a good ruler and strives to protect her people's future no matter what, and no matter what sacrifices that means making. I think Alencia is just really badass here, and I like that she gets the ability to shine more than she did in Path of Radiance as a ruler and being in charge of things.
Yeah, it seemed like in Path of Radiance she was more like the damsel in distress, so it was nice to see her kind of develop into a full character.
Yeah, for sure. And she kind of does at the end of Path of Radiance, getting her own sacred sword and everything and fighting for her country. But I also think it says a lot about her as a character that she says Ludwig will stand trial at the end of this instead of hanging him from the castle walls or something. I think it's awesome that Lucia faces her death with a smile and praising Alencia for her actions. That whole scene just really got me. But of course, as we know, since we've beaten it, the Greel mercenaries come to save the day, because of course they do. And we get one of my favorite game cutscenes ever. All the characters I thought looked great, and I love that everybody in that scene gets kind of a cool moment to themselves.
Oh yeah, that was amazing. Like, because I wasn't fully on board with the game until that cutscene, and then like the smile just like broke across my face.
I know the exact one you mean.
Yep. At that point, I was drawn into the game and couldn't stop playing. But up until that point, I was kind of stop and go,
That's about
especially on
where
part one.
that's about where it happened with me too.
Because part two introduced more characters that I knew and seemed more plausible as a storyline based on the first game. Like part
So
one seemed a little random. So part two was like
yes.
getting me there. And then part three fully.
So to continue on with our story, we learn that Alencia's retainer Bastion knew that if he left the country, the rebellion would start, and he contracted Ike's company to watch out for Alencia. He also sends word that Dane is growing in power with the new upstart king and their own hero, the Silver-Haired Maiden. Alencia tells Ike that the Black Knight is still alive, which terrifies him, and this ends part two. So we talked about maps and stuff. I thought Ludwig was a weaker villain than Jared for me.
Yeah, he didn't seem that particularly strong.
He's still cool to me, but he's not like final boss cool.
No, I felt like the villains don't super stand out in this that much to me. It's more the internal conflict of characters I love being at odds rather than kind of the behind the scene villain pulling the
Hmm.
strings and stuff.
So let's go through characters for part two real quick. Who are your standouts? Who are you happy to have back, etc.
Uh, I was happy to have all of them, but like Makalov back. But I think Har stands out as probably the most. I actually was tweeting about this a while ago, but I think Har might be the most broken character in all of Fire Emblem because there were
I
battles
wouldn't
where.
say that.
Well, I haven't played them all either. So in the ones that I've played, um, there were battles where like troops would regenerate, and I could send him into like groups of like 9 troops, and he would like defeat 20 troops in a row. Like they just keep coming, and you just keep killing them. So it
Hmm.
almost felt unfair because like I just send him directly into the war zone, clear it out, and then send everybody through.
Yeah, in the games you've played, Har might be the strongest character. I think you
But
might be right.
Nephany, it was fun to have her back.
Hmm.
Leanne, of course. Mordecai, Jeffrey, to some extent Kiernan. I think Dan Ved's funny in his own like weird way.
And he's definitely not Dev Dan.
Definitely not. You can't get that guy in that game in this game.
No.
And then Khalil is obviously fun to have around.
My standout for this one was Alencia for me.
Hmm.
I'm like very interested in like the politics of the world and stuff. So I just love seeing her being a great leader, and I love that Mordecai and Leith are still around. After they, I just think back to when they were so, especially Leith was very resentful of the Bjork when we meet her in Path of Radiance, and it just shows to me that she's come a very long way. All right, so my final thoughts on this part. I wrote, overall, I think the idea of coming so close to Civil War is really cool and showcases early on the scope the game has. It felt like anything was possible to me, and it's cool that the game isn't just about one single thing. Um, I think it's interesting that our heroes didn't just live happily ever after, and that there have been problems since the credits rolled on the last game. It doesn't feel very fairy tale fantasy to me. So part three is intersecting vows. In part three, we cut to the Greel mercenaries doing what they do, but Ranulph comes to warn Ike that war is happening once again, since Raphael, one of the Herons, returns from death. I guess we don't know where he's been. He reveals that Benyon is actually to blame for the massacre of the Heron people. The Lagoos ask Benyon for an investigation, but are not only denied, their messenger is executed. The Lagoos thus declare war. Ike is torn, but ultimately decides to help his Laguz friends. The first mission I thought was really cool, working with Skrimir to invade the Binyan border. I again love fort fights and fights that feel like they're to scale, and this one feels very large in scale, and it's another big fort, so that is absolutely my cup of tea.
Was that, I'm getting two of them mixed up. Is that the battle where you meet Ralph's real mom? Yeah, Ralph. Rolf.
Rolf. Oh.
Rolf.
Sorry. I was like, who is Ralph? I don't remember.
I think it's the first one or the second one. Might be I think it's the second one. But anyway, I thought it was very interesting that they introduce his mother and he decides to stay with his brothers. But anyway.
Yes. I definitely agree. Let's see. So this whole thing, once again, begins to feel like very realistic war to me. The Binyan Council is worried by the Laguz swiftly advancing into their territory. So they work with noble landowners to mount a defense. These landowners, I thought, probably have no idea what the Imperial Court of Binyan has done to the Laguz. They just know they're being invaded by their former allies, and so they're fighting back. General Levail, one of the Binyan Knights, actually realizes that this is a bad situation for both sides and tries to work things out, but no one will listen to him. Even Zelgius shows up and tells him that the politicians should worry about politics. Their role as soldiers is just to defend the nation from invaders. It made me feel like the big bad wasn't even really a bad guy. The Laguz see them as an enemy because of all of that, because they're mounting a defense and everything just gets worse. At the same time, though, the divided Laguz tribes are now growing closer through this mutual conflict. So I just like that. Yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I think that it works. I think I was a little confused by it. I was sort of not sure where this was headed, of like why we were getting the different characters split up the way that they were. So I was a little confused as to the nature of this one. Like, obviously they grouped all the Grail mercenaries together, which is obvious, but I think it was just a little more confusing about how it fit in to like the larger part of things that were going on. Because I
Larger narrative that was building.
Yes. I don't know. Did you feel, you don't seem like you felt that way?
I can see how you felt that way. I kind of got that stuff just kind of has to keep coming to a head because when Dane invaded Crimea and then lost, it just created such a giant power imbalance that, like, okay, now somebody's got to rule Dane. And of course, Benyon did a lot of the heavy lifting in the first war, so of course they want to be the ones to do it. But then, the more we learn about their senators, it's like, well, Benyon, the good guys, really want to control everything because they're the good guys. So it's only right that they control everything. But then you see it from, Crimea's perspective, from Dane's perspective, and you're like, I don't know.
I think maybe it was because I didn't trust Benyon from the like from the first game. So like it was kind of like a no doubt in my mind that they weren't doing the right thing and all their behaviors were manipulative and kind of like two-sided. So like I should have any like positive feeling toward them going into this one. So when they were trying to convince me they're bad, I was already on board with that. So
for me, I had a little more pity to them, or I sympathized with them a little more, just because in that first war they did so much of the heavy lifting that, like, Crimea never would have been able to win without Benyon helping them, But it's interesting you picked up on that really early on. I think you're just maybe a little more observant in that way.
Maybe, but it was definitely Path of Radiance where I developed those thoughts. It wasn't great, so this game telling me, oh yeah, they're bad. It was like, well, I knew that last game. Keep telling me the story.
But are they fully bad though? That's also the question, because it's like if you look at the different nations, nowhere, I stand by that. Nowhere is really good.
Sure, yes, of course.
Crimea just had this giant rebellion because Alencia's done some missteps, and I get why they did that. Gallia is having its own issues with the Lagoos, as it always has.
Hmm.
Dane, I don't really even need to talk about. There's an entire episode about why Dane is not very good.
So I think it
But
was just more of like I'm already on board with this story point. Give
mhm,
me the next part of it, sort
I
of
see.
idea.
So the next story point in line is that Ike starts to worry that the medallion his sister Mist carries is acting up, and there's a story about it containing a dark god within that feeds off the chaos of war. Ashnard, it's revealed, was trying to start a continent-wide war in the last game for this exact purpose, and now it's starting to happen without him. This all comes to a head when Skimir, the heir to the Gallian throne, uh, the Laguz people, the Beast people. If you don't, I'm saying this at home for our listeners that don't have all the countries memorized. This all comes to a head when Skirmir challenges Zelgius to single combat to decide the outcome of the war. Something that I thought was really honorable from both sides, that they were both going to go by that. Skirmir is defeated and the Laguz pull back, just as Dane enters the war on Binyan's side, the country that they just earned bleh. Skirmir is defeated and the Laguz pull back, just as Dane enters the war on Binyan's side, which is the country they just re-earned independence from. So that was definitely a big plot twist. The senators of Binyan oust Empress Sonichi, and she flees to Crimea to be with Ike and Alencia, as well as repair relations with the Laguz, as she'd never wanted to fight a war against them in the first place. Thus, an alliance is formed between Crimea, the Laguz, and Binyan's loyalty forces, with Ike now put at the helm of the army, which he's really upset about. But everybody respects him due to the events of the war in the last game, so he's the only one that is really a choice. How'd you feel about this so far?
I was on board. I was just honestly pretty happy to see all of them again. So,
Well, I'm glad you're on board, because that brings us to the next plot point. Micaiah learns that Tellius has ordered Dane into the conflict because his advisors, Izuka, is aligned with the Binyan senators and has tricked Peleus into signing a blood pact that will activate if the Senate isn't obeyed. This will kill citizens of Dane every day. They don't really tell us how many, they just say a number of citizens, and we can kind of speculate about how many that is. How did you feel about that as a plot point?
I don't know. I thought that was one of the weaker parts of this game.
The fans seem to agree with you
So
because the blood pact is one of the least liked bits in this game.
spoiler for later on in the episode, I guess. But and then when Nasela also has the blood pact on him, I just felt like they maybe like wrote themselves into like a story corner and needed a sort of teleportation powder to get themselves out of it, and the blood pact was that powder.
I kind of agree with you. My thoughts were I've said, I really like all the political stuff a lot. And so I definitely get that. To me, it feels like all the politics have been handled really, really well until this point. Everything makes sense. Everything fits as to why people do what they do. And then when we get to the blood pact, it's like, well, what are the politics behind this? And you just wave your hand and go, magic.
This blood pact dramatic irony felt like melodrama instead.
Yes.
So like you can have two characters fighting to the death and fully understand where each character is coming from and understanding why they have to fight to the death. This felt like fighting to the death based on a technicality.
Yeah. I decided I would try and defend this as best I could, even though I'm not the biggest fan of it either. So my best defense of it is that Benyan is a holy empire with tons of ancient magics. So I can somewhat see how they could conjure something like a blood pact that you can agree to and you must follow it.
Mhm.
That's the best lore reason I got.
Okay.
The solution to this is that Peleus is killed to end the contract. Yes?
Yes, that's what I did.
But I don't know if you looked into it. If you play the game again on your same file, you get New Game Plus mode.
I did not know that.
Okay. So that scene has the ability to go entirely differently. And I figured I'd point out some of these differences in this episode because a lot of people don't know this. But Micaiah actually gets in the way and tries to convince Peleus that there's another way, and he agrees. And so they do some research and they find out that if you kill the other person on the other end of the pact and then destroy the pact, the physical paper of it, that will also undo it. So Tellius vows to go find Duke Lycain and kill him instead. So he just comes with you as a playable character from that moment on. How do you feel about that?
That seems okay.
Still not super loving it?
No, I was trying to like think of like how I would rework that plot point into a version that would be okay in my brain.
The
Like
way I
I'm
would,
sounding like I sound negative about this game. I really, really enjoyed this game. This was just the one like big thing
yes,
that I was kind of like, I don't know if I can get behind this, guys.
I agree. The way I would have reworked it was you need a reason for Dane to enter the war on Binyon's side that isn't magic. And I'm not entirely sure what that is. And it seems like the writers weren't sure either.
Hmm.
But I might do like there's a plague spreading through Dane. They think that because Benyon is like the Holy Empire, that Benyon has some ancient magic that can cure it. And so Peleus has to do what they say to try and get this cure from them. That would have been my solution. And then maybe later it's revealed that they don't have the cure at all. And so that's why Dane gets more hostile towards them or something.
That could work. I think the Peleus of it in general always felt like a stretch because it felt like you're introduced as Micaiah as like the leader of the Dane people, and then it's like, oh yeah, there's this other guy that's actually the leader of the people. But then I had already
Mm.
bought into Micaiah sort of being the figurehead, and then even like Micaiah is trying to convince you that she's not the figurehead, but it's like she's definitely the figurehead. So
I like this though in the sense that it sort of parallels Benyon almost. That the Benyon has the Apostle Empress Sonichi as the spiritual and religious leader of the people, but then the senators are the actual politicians that do the legislative work. And Dane ends up being very similar in that Micaiah ends up being sort of the spiritual icon for the Dane people, while Peleus is the legislative head that does the work there. So I kind of like that. I also the soundtrack for Peleus, his theme, I think it's called "Sorrowful Prince Peleus," is one of my favorite Fire Emblem songs. It actually has a lot of bassoon in it, which I used to play, and I could probably still make my way on it today. But I learned how to play that song even. So a little fun fact. Getting back to the plot, though, this leads us to me, one of the coolest parts in the game. We get Dane versus the alliance of everybody. We get to see Ike versus Micaiah, which is both sides we've been playing as, and you kind of foreshadowed this earlier. I absolutely adore stuff like that in games, and it's super rare to get to have the heroes fight against each other in a meaningful way. And this is another plot point that I've heard people think is stupid, but I stand by thinking it's super cool. What did you think?
it felt unfair. Like I was getting on board with what was happening, obviously by this point, but
Yes.
it was kind of like, do we really have to do this?
Well, some of them you don't. And I don't remember all the interactions right now off the top of my head, but like I remember Zyhark has an interaction with somebody. I don't remember who it is. It might have been Ilyana or something. That if you try to kill her with him, he's like, yeah, I just can't do this, and he leaves the battlefield,
I
or
don't
he
think it
just
was her
refuses to attack.
because they were on the same side.
Okay, then it's not Ilyana. I forget who it is, but
I remember that though because I had that happen, but it's not going to come back to me in the moment.
yeah, there's a couple interactions like that I really liked. And I think this might be a good time too to say this game actually has like no supports, and I didn't even feel that because you have these in-game like or in-battle talk conversations between people that I felt like were really meaningful. So I was actually kind of okay with that.
Yep.
I also felt like it was spread out a little bit. I love the supports in Fire Emblem, but especially coming off of some of the other games like Three Houses, I get out of a battle and I have 15 support conversations, And I'm just like, am I ready to sit down and read a novel before I go to the next thing? I love it, but I'm also, that's the downside. So I kind of don't mind the shorter conversations in the moment that are more contextual. So the fighting stirs the entity within Mist's medallion, the Dark God. And to me, it's very Dragon Ball Z-esque because it's very reminiscent to me of Goku and Vegeta fighting. I know you're not a big anime guy. I don't know how much you know about Dragon Ball Z. Oh, okay. Have you seen Dragon Ball Z then? Do you know what scene I'm talking about? Okay, sweet. So we're on the same page. You know what I mean? Like the Majin, they're worried that Majin Buu is going to be awakened by fighting, and Vegeta's like, well, we're going to fight anyway. Yeah, it's very Dragon Ball to me there. But Mist hears a voice in her head that tells her that the Song of Release should be used to awaken the entity rather than the war. The Empress of Benyon tries, but things only work when Micaiah steps in and sings the song, releasing the god from its slumber. A bright light shines from the sky and turns both armies to stone. And this ends part 3. So this is my favorite part out of the 4.
Part 3 is?
I think so.
Okay. Same.
Because I just love the both sides fighting each other a lot. That's about all I've got on part 3. Let's go through characters real quick, and then we'll cut to break. I'm obviously super stoked to have Ike back. He is one of my favorite protagonists in anything. Titania, I'm really happy she's back. Shannon and Ranulph were 2 of my other favorites. And Ranulph really gets to shine in this part as he tries to control Skirmir. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like whoever, I always don't know how to pronounce his name. The King of Gallia, Kangas or whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know why he thought putting Skirmir in charge strategically was a good idea, and maybe he didn't. Maybe he put Ranulph in charge strategically, and Skirmir just ignores him.
That sounds more accurate.
But oh man, it's crazy. It's weird to me that Leith had a sister in Lyre. But I think she's neat as a character, and nobody cares about her though.
Yep.
And I guess stat-wise, she's terrible. Kaiza is literally the most unmemorable Fire Emblem character maybe I've ever played with. I still, anytime I see his name on the list, I'm like, Kaiza, who is that? And then I'm like, oh yeah, there's some other random cat guy.
Yep. It was good to have Janif back, and Oscar, of course. Oscar being the happiest Fire Emblem character to exist. Big Oscar fan. He might be one of my favorites from this, just because of how purely happy he is.
He's a good favorite, I think.
And Soren, of course.
So that ends part 3, and I think that carries us through to our break.
Bye.
Stick around.
Hi there, I'm David.
And I'm Kate.
And we're the hosts of another Zelda podcast.
There are so many good podcasts out there, and some of them in particular concern the Legend of Zelda.
That's right, Kate, and we are another one of them. That is actually the name of our show, Another Zelda Podcast.
And in our show in particular, we talk about some of our favorite dungeons, characters, boss battles. We have top 10 lists.
Yeah, we do deep dives on game design and production aspects of the different Zelda games.
And we talk about our own experiences. We do some review episodes, talk about our challenges, our struggles, and our victories.
That's right. Really just almost anything that has to do with Zelda, we like to talk about it. A new episode comes out every other Friday, and you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and YouTube.
And you can also check out our episodes on our website, anotherzeldapodcast.com.
That's right. All right, we will see you there.
Okay, bye.
Hey, this is TC.
And this is Jim from the Studio Demands It podcast,
where every episode we take a demand from a hypothetical studio,
which could be you,
and challenge ourselves to conceptualize, pitch, and craft a film based on the stipulations
or the demands
we are given. We talk about movies all the time. Particularly, we complain about the choices made in the films we've seen.
We're nerds like that.
And, of course, like any good nerd does, we automatically assume that we could do better.
Even with the demands and restrictions that clearly must have been put on by a production.
So head on over to studiodemandsit.com and listen to our previous library of previous episodes. Our precious library, Jim. Our library of precious episodes.
You're a pirate, Smeagol.
Okay, so head on over to studiodemands.com to listen to our library of episodes.
And submit your demand for a future episode, too.
So go do that.
Okay, bye.
Okay, end of ad.
So, both sides have been turned to stone, but our heroes are spared by being close to the medallion, and Micaiah's body has been taken over by the dark goddess Yune. So I figured it's explained a lot later in the game. And you don't get all of it, I don't think, until you're in New Game Plus mode. So I was going to explain kind of the lore reasons for what is happening, and then you can tell me how much you got in your playthrough.
All right, go.
So there's a goddess named Ashara, who is called the Goddess of Dawn, and she's worshipped by an ancient race called the Manaz, or the Manazu, which is changed to the Zunanma outside of Japan for some reason, which is just Mananzu, and you've rearranged some of the letters, and I have no clue why they felt the need to do that. I hate those changes, that it's like, yeah, we changed it in translation. Oh, okay. Was it like difficult to pronounce? Like not any harder? So I have no idea why they changed that. But anyway, if you believe in there's certain fan-made Fire Emblem chronological timelines. Ashunera and the Zunanma are actually the earliest thing to happen in the timeline of all of Fire Emblem, if you believe in these timelines. These Nanma, or the Manaz, whatever you want to call them, are a race of animal-like humanoids that supposedly evolved from animals. Over time, they grow more and more different until they eventually split into the Laguz and the Bjork and began fighting. Ashunera, in anger over her creations fighting, attempted to stop them and ended up flooding all the continents of the world except Tellius. She seems to regret her actions, though, and she stops, leaving Tellius. And she splits herself into two separate beings. Those beings are called Yune, which is the emotional side of Ashunera, and Ashara, the orderly side. Ashara worried that Yune would be too dangerous and raised a group of heroes to kill her, but Laron, a Laguz, convinced her to seal away Yune instead. Remember too, well, we'll skip ahead on that for now. Or I guess we don't have to. I guess we can go over it now. So spoilers for the end of the episode, but Sephiron is Laron. Yeah, so him and the Bjork hero Altina, who wields both Ragnell and Elandite, which I thought was super cool, worried that Ashara would give up on humanity again, so they convince her to slumber for 1,000 years under the condition that humanity, if left to its own devices, will not get into another world war. But obviously that brings us to the current moment where we've done exactly that. Yune says that she can turn back some of the petrified people and help us take the fight to Ashara, but we should split up the forces into 3 separate armies. How did you feel about splitting them up into armies and being able to control who went where?
I thought that was useful because I had obviously lost a lot of the people from the first group, so it was a nice way to balance it back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess you could probably soft-lock yourself there too if you pick poorly.
Oh yeah, I guess you technically could.
You'd send in the Micaiah and Soth, and that's it.
That was pretty close to it. There were a few, but yeah.
I love this a lot because it gives you a reason to actually use so much of this massive cast of characters. It would have been way easier for the developers to just say, here's the largest Fire Emblem roster so far. Now pick your 15 units.
Yeah.
But instead, they give you the opportunity to use almost all of them. So we get the Silver Army, led by Micaiah and Soth, the Greel Army, led by Ike and Mist, and the Hawk Army, led by Tabarn and Ranulf. But of course, just before we go our separate ways, Ike and Ranulf have a very important conversation. Ranulph tells Ike that Zelgius is actually the Black Knight. What did you think of that whole reveal, Daniel?
That had been spoiled, so it wasn't like a pearl clutching surprise or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it made sense. It was a smart story choice. I liked that part of it.
I did too, and I wasn't spoiled on it because I played this game 10 years ago or so. I do hate that it's now been spoiled for so many people due to the mobile game.
Yep.
They just have the Black Knight with his helmet off, and I think it's an awesome variant of the character to have, but I would hate finding out that way, and I hate that these games are so hard to get these days, so a lot of people's first exposure to it is going to be that. So just a little gripe I have, and they really need to port both Path of Radiance and Radiant Dawn to the Switch or whatever. But there's rumors that that's coming, and I'm very much hoping that they're true. And I don't need an update either. I don't need a remaster. I really don't need anything. Just port them as they are so other people can play them. That would make me happy.
They can remake them like Link's Awakening, like Charlie Brown looking characters. Just to make Chris like have a nervous breakdown.
Yes, I like the word conniption.
There you go.
But yeah, please don't change it too much. Just I've never been one of those, like, to sidetrack really quick. I've never been one of those that's like, ooh, I got this rare thing and I'm so glad that it's rare so nobody else can have it. Like, I've never gotten satisfaction from that. I actually do own both these games because I bought them close to when they came out. But I really want everybody to be able to experience it however they want to. So anyway, all our heroes are all set. So they head out for the Tower of Guidance in Benyon. We get a series of battles with each army, but I think my favorite one was the ambush battle with Ike's army.
I would agree with that. I thought the battle with Micaiah's army was fairly frustrating.
Is that because it's in a desert and it's hard to move?
Yes. That, and I felt like, and this being 100% my fault, I had made that team not quite up strong enough.
You didn't give them Har.
I think that I gave them Har, and that was about it, thinking that would be enough. And then it was just not quite enough. So I did Har, and then I did like a bunch of magic users.
I can see why that'd be tough.
Yeah. So it was 100% my own fault. Like, shame on me. But yeah, it was pretty tough.
Yeah, that makes sense. I also thought it was interesting the resistance is made of Benyon soldiers that have sworn allegiance to Ashara, not knowing they'll be killed at the end.
Yep. Whoops.
Yeah. I think, though, the battle after those is even better because Oliver shows up again. How did you feel about Oliver making his triumphant return?
I was thrilled to death, honestly.
Did you recruit him?
I knew that you could, but I had lost Raphael, so I wasn't able to.
My heart. So he's fighting for Benyon, but if you talk to him with Raphael, for our viewers that don't know, he prizes beauty above country, so he switches sides to fight with Raphael. And I love that if you speak to him with Ike, Ike is like, "Oh, it's you. What are you doing?" And he's like, "I'm fighting for your side because it's beautiful," or something. And Ike is like, would you mind like rejoining the enemy ranks, please? He like tries to unrecruit him.
For those who have played Three Houses, I think Oliver looks a lot like Ferdinand's dad.
I haven't seen Ferdinand's dad yet, so I don't know, but that's really funny.
Oh, so he's just sort of like a portly, ginger, mustached guy. But
maybe
anyway,
it's a descendant or something.
I know that's like slowly becoming my headcanon mainly just because I think it's funny, but that's just like a side note for the Three House diehards that know what Ferdinand's dad looks like off the top of their heads.
So after that, we finally get to fight Izuka with the Hawk Army, and it felt so good.
Yeah, that was a very satisfying one.
Yes. And I still like Izuka, sort of. I like his writing. I get why he does what he does. It's to further humanity at any cost. I felt like he's very fleshed out, and like the rest of the cast, I get it. Like, I get why he does what he does. I just hate him despite that.
Yep.
And
very Worm Tongue from Lord of the Rings.
Oh, so much. But it seems like everybody kind of feels that way. Like, I think he's one of the best villains in the entire series, and everybody loves to hate him, and he's great.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I totally agree. I like that they went back to that plot point from the first game with him and didn't just let him sort of be like a minor antagonist.
Yes. So you, I know, didn't do this, but if you attack him with Tellius, they have a conversation there. And Tellius says, like, you brought me into the being royalty and stuff. You kind of brought me up, but I have a suspicion that I am not Ashnard's son. And Izuka says, no, you're not. You're just some random orphan I found, and man, were you convenient. And Tellius is very upset by this. But more on that later. So we also get more politics, with Alencia's uncle secretly being Bertram of Dane's Four Riders. Do you have thoughts on that?
That didn't really surprise me either. I think that was spoiled.
I
but
thought
it
that
wouldn't have really surprised me anyway.
I just really liked how, kind of like you said with Izuka, even minor bosses are coming back and being more important to the story overall.
Yep.
And I'm glad too that he got fleshed out a little more, because he was the only writer I felt like that didn't really matter.
Yep.
In Path of Radiance.
It irked me a little that he wasn't more viable. That part was a little annoying, but like the character design's pretty cool.
Speaking of cool things coming back story-wise, I like the little aside where King Kengus and Gifka give Ike Irvan his father's axe. I thought that was a nice little exchange they had. I think when I was a lot younger playing, I didn't actually end up using it, which makes me sad.
That is kind of sad.
Yeah. I might have given it to like Nolan or something, or Har. Maybe I gave it to Har. I'm not sure.
You have to give it to Titania.
Maybe I did that. I don't remember. It's been too many years.
You have to do that. It should
definitely be locked to her. That'd be a good conversation if Ike and Titania did that.
It like warms my heart thinking about that. But anyway.
All right, so finally our heroes reach the tower, but the outside is overrun by soldiers, quote, reborn in flesh but not in spirit. So you must pick your top 11 characters to journey inside, plus a few more plot-relevant characters. So who did you pick? If you remember.
It wasn't that long ago, so I should totally know, but I was probably Ike, Soren, Titania, Boyd, Janif, Jeffrey, Har. No, it's not coming back to me.
I don't remember all of mine either, but I know I picked Skrimir, Edward, Shinon, Titania, Zyhark, Tibarn, Ranulf, Kengus, Volug, Nyla, and Gatry, I think. It's been a lot of years. If I picked today, though, I'd pick mostly the same, but I would make sure to bring Pellias and Soren as well.
Mm-hmm.
You also get a Heron, and you have a choice there. And I think I picked Raphael just because I thought he was neat, but today I'd also probably choose Rayson.
I went with Leanne. And I think I tweeted about this. When you select her, she says, "I do fighting." And that was just like amazing.
I do love that. I didn't know that.
Just because she's still learning to speak their language, which is obviously English, and assuming you're playing the English version of it.
Yes.
But I do fighting is just perfect.
Yeah, that's great for her character. So we enter the tower and we immediately come face to face with Duke Kane and get to settle our vendetta against him. And in the version I was going through for this one, that allows us to end the Blood Pact, which has been going until now. He is killed, and Tellius and Micaiah are able to rip up the Blood Pact. And if you attack him with Tellius, they have a conversation where he tells Tellius, like, "Oh, I'm surprised you've made it this far and you're not turned to stone. You can go fight the enemy commander. That would be good." And Tellius is like, "They're all turned to stone. Like, you don't have power over my people right now. So all bets are off." We continue up the tower to the final fight with the Black Knight, and Ike defeats him. What did you think of that fight?
I thought that was a good fight. It annoyed me in these games that you couldn't go past level 20.
You wanted to be even stronger for it?
Yeah, I guess so. It just felt like after you got to 20 and you have your like level up points that you can use. So like you don't even have to like use them and you can make them strong. So it kind of felt like they 20 feels very, very low. And maybe that's just like the shining force in me where you can go to like level 99 and be like very, very strong, but it felt like
I mean, if we're gonna go that logic, like you at least get to go to 60 because you're promoting at 23 times. But yeah, I definitely agree that by this point in the game, a lot of your more used units are definitely capping out.
Kind of felt disappointing as someone who likes to grind up certain characters.
I agree.
You'd get them to level 20 and that was kind of it. So it didn't ruin it, but it just changed it from, oh yeah, I really like this one character. I'll get them to level I'll get them to like level 45 and they'll be like unstoppable.
Yeah.
Really have that.
It's sort of like in the moment, I was a little disappointed as well. But looking back on it now, I think it's interesting that it sort of changes the game from trying to grow as a character to when you're starting to cap out a bunch. Now I have that feeling of like, well, I want them to grow more as a character. But when I look at where we are, it's like, well, this is it. This is what we were growing for. You know what I mean? Like I'm more accepting of it now, but definitely when I first played it, I felt that same disappointment.
Yeah, but it's still a great battle, mainly because of the weight of the two games leading up to it.
And to me, it is a fantastic battle only if you play it the way it's meant to be played. You actually can equip Ike with a hammer, and then this completely trivializes the whole thing, and he demolishes the Black Knight.
Oh, really? That I didn't.
Yeah. I don't think you should do that, to be clear, but it is an option. If you have a really underleveled Ike, you can do that and get through. Because it's an effective weapon, and it's like blessed by Yune now. But anyway, to me, it just kind of feels like destiny between Ike and Zelgius. There can just only be one. So in New Game Plus, if you do certain things, you get an extra scene here as well. You have to like use the Black Knight in an earlier chapter with Micaiah, and then you have to have Ike and the Black Knight fight at least once in a later chapter in like part 3, and then they have to both survive that battle and continue. But if you do all that, you get a flashback showing a young Ike being taken care of by Zelgius and Serene in the wake of Griel's rampage after he's touched the medallion.
That's cool.
So Serene like removes Ike's memory partially because he actually witnessed the events on that day, and Serene was like, a young child definitely should not have seen his father mow down an entire town's worth of people and then his own mother.
Seems fair.
You also get a reveal of Zelgius is a Brandon. Yes, he has Legu's blood, and he is talking to Serene about how he wants to leave, or he's going to have to leave the Dane military at some point because he doesn't age like everybody else. He ages much slower, and it's going to get noticeable at some point.
Yep, I liked that.
Okay, that was in your version too?
Yes.
Okay, good. I thought that was really interesting, and just one last little sprinkle of spice on his character. So this gives us the Elandite Sword, which I thought was super epic. Who did you give it to?
I give it to Ike, obviously.
You had him use that instead of the Ragnell. Ah, that's really interesting.
I believe I just gave him both of them and just kind of alternated. But
oh, that's cool.
Somebody else? No, because I don't think I really had a prominent enough sword user to.
You know, I'm a fanboy for Zyhark, because I've said even in this episode. So I gave it to Zyhark, and he looks super cool as like this little lithe swordsman with this giant sword. And it lets him attack at range as well, like the Black Knight. So that looks really cool. So anyway, we move on to the next fight, which is against Degensia, the Dragon King, who has actually been alive, apparently, since the original war 800-something years ago.
I thought this was the weakest of the tower fights. Just because it felt the most random.
Yeah, I'll give you that.
It was just kind of like, we need another person to be a villain in this tower. Who's available? Oh, he's available. Just toss him in there.
I did think it was nice, though, that they had him explain why he changed the story. Because it was like, I've said in a couple things, 1,000 years is not that long. Because I know we've talked about it like in Shining Force. I think that the prologue of that also says 1,000 years of peace or something. And I'm like, this is not an unfathomably long amount of time. Like, especially when you have dragon people who exist for much longer than that. It's weird that people wouldn't remember these things. And I know it's like, well, 10 or 15 generations, it doesn't seem that long. But it's like, we went from literal, like, I don't know, the modern day equivalent would be like if there were wizards flying around and stuff, we wouldn't have forgotten in 10 generations.
Wait, there aren't wizards flying around?
I know, I'm so sorry. I mean, I don't know, maybe your grandparents passed you on something better than mine. Maybe they did their job better.
We did get an abnormally large amount of brooms, but I was told it was about something else.
Oh, okay. All right, are we done with that fight? Because I agree, it is still kind of the weakest. All right, so then we continue up more stairs to be reunited with Serene. And I think it's super cool that they brought Serene back, and he was so important. Because back in the Path of Radiance days, when that was all we had, I was looking at him in this prison cell when you find him with Brahm, Nephany, and Kieran. And I was like, do you see this guy's stats? Like, you can check his stat page, and he's amazing. So I was just like, where does that guy fit in? Like, where does he come back? And Path of Radiance doesn't really answer that question. It turns out Serene was behind these conflicts all along. It was his desire to wake the goddess and have the people be judged. In his long life, he's grown tired of the Laguz and Bjork fighting for generations, and he believes the only way to have peace is for them to both be destroyed and for Ashara to start again. The fight, I thought, was kind of with the little elemental spirit orbs. I think it would have been better if Serene was just by himself facing down your army.
Yes, I totally agree. I thought that was kind of frustrating.
Then the next scene is also different, depending on what you've been doing. So I'm assuming for you killed Serene and then walked into Ashara's throne room. I said that the next scene is different depending, again, on what you've been doing. So I'm assuming for you killed Serene and then walked into Ashara's throne room. Okay, so if you got the Ike flashback earlier when you fought the Black Knight, if you did all those things, you now get another flashback here. You get a flashback showing the Serene's Forest Massacre. The senators of Benyon lie to the people and tell them the Herons assassinated the apostle. This angers the citizens, and I thought it was really interesting. Was this in your version? Was this part in your version?
Yes, this sounds familiar.
Okay. To me, this this sort of resonated with me and felt, again, like storytelling that really just hits me. Because it's fully within lore and not at all heavy-handed. But I feel like the whole thing is kind of a statement on our world and how we react to things and how we treat each other. I often find that in life we are sort of, I feel like, led by authority figures at times to hate people that are very similar to us in reality. And the leaders, a lot of the times that lead us to do these things, are just not quite what they are purported to be. And Serene is really exasperated by this after longing for peace and adamantly working toward it, giving up, he gives up his entire life and goes to work for Binyan just to change for things from the inside, because he's a Laguz and he wants a better life for the Laguz. But at this point, he just kind of loses hope. He wants Ashara to just end it all. The people are too easily manipulated to fight each other. And I can definitely understand him becoming so black-pilled after living a few hundred years of this with relatively little progress towards anything meaningful. I thought it was very funny, too. Apparently, if you attack Serene with Oliver, you get a pretty funny exchange. Just Serene being like, really? You're here at the end of it all? Like, we are quite in strange times. Because, they knew each other since Oliver was a high-ranking Binyan noble.
They were both part of the Senate, right?
Yes. Well, sort of. Oliver was part of the Senate. Serene was like the direct advisor he was the prime minister that was directly advising the apostle. So this is where the change happens. I actually have it noted down here. Serene dies and the doors open to Ashara's throne room. If it's your second playthrough and you've done all the stuff for Ike to get that earlier flashback, Micaiah and Yune revive him just as he dies.
Mm-hmm.
So Serene is really surprised by this, as is Ike. He tells Serene that Ashara is waiting and it's time for the final confrontation. And Serene can get up and come with them if he wants to. Let's see. I think I wrote down a quote from him. He says, "If you want the total extinction of Bjork and Laguz alike, then you can just lie here. But if not, this is your last chance to start fixing things. Think hard about it." So our heroes do ultimately press on and just leave Serene lying there. But he's alive this time. So you enter the final room of the game and find Ashara standing there waiting for you. Ike appeals one last time for another chance. And when it isn't given, he tells the goddess, "Make your peace with whatever the gods worship." I thought that was awesome.
Yep.
So here we get into more changes. As you push the start fight button, if you saved Serene, he appears to the left and asks the goddess's forgiveness for everyone. He says everything he's done has been a mistake. His suffering in life has blinded him to the beautiful things of the world, but the people deserve compassion despite all of their wrongdoings. Ashara tells him no, and he says nothing else, but he joins you as a playable character just for the final battle. He is also the only character in the entire series to join with 3 double S weapon ranks, and is the only major antagonist to be playable in his own game, omitting the different timeline games like Fates and Three Houses. If you talk with him, or if you talk to him with Sonichi, the Empress of Binyan, she tells him, "The punishment for abandoning your Empress is being drowned in rancid butter, so I hope you're a strong swimmer."
So romantic.
Yes. He's very appreciative of being brought back into the fold. I thought it was really cool as well. If you attack Ashara with Serene, who now goes by the name Laran as well, he readopts his old name. But if you attack Ashara with him, she will not retaliate against him. She will never fight him.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was neat, like showing that she actually does still have some compassion somewhere. All right, are you ready for another giant change that I know you probably didn't do?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, so if you have Ike and Soren A support in Path of Radiance, and then you transfer your GameCube memory card to your Wii, and you're playing off of that file, and then they A support again, you get them up to the A support, you get one last conversation right here. Soren and Ike talk about the day they met, because Soren has asked Ike if he remembers it, and he says no earlier in the game. But Ike tells him he does remember. They were in Gallia, and Ike brought Soren food because he was like this homeless vagrant living on the edge of town, and they were about the same age. But Ike tries to get him to come back home with him, and Soren won't do it. But Ike says, "I'll bring you food here again tomorrow." And then Ike doesn't come back the next day like he said he would. So Soren goes into town and he finds all the people dead. And that's the day that Griel went on his massacre and all that. So Soren, not finding Ike among the bodies, packs up and leaves for Crimea to be among the Bjork. He stays in a church along the way, and they misinterpreted his brand mark as a sign he'd been trained in magic. So they take him in, teach him more magic, and teach him other things, like how to speak properly and how to behave. After some time, he leaves and wanders Crimea again for a few years until he finds Ike again. He wanted to be with the only person who'd ever shown him kindness, and wanted to take him in back then. He starts like crying, and Ike just holds him. And now I'm gonna get a little controversial again. Okay. So there's like a vocal group of fans that interpret this interaction as Ike and Soren being lovers together. But they're like, my stance on this is they're just best friends. And I wanted to address that contingent of the fan base for just a second. If you're a dude and you have a friend and he goes through a terrible breakup and he's crying or a family member dies, you can hug him and it's not gay. You should support your friends, and it's okay for two bros to hug it out at the end of the world, because they are literally facing down the apocalypse. And I'm just like, I don't know. I think it's cool that they hug. Like, I like that. To me, that adds a lot to his character. So that ends that change. You fight Ashara, which I thought was really cool. What did you think about that boss fight?
I thought that was a fun battle.
It's not particularly difficult, is it?
No, not at all.
At that point,
okay.
Yeah, I thought so too. I was like, it's okay that this is not super difficult. We're kind of here for story, I think, and it's also another very rare Fire Emblem games that doesn't end with a dragon. That's always a nice touch when that doesn't happen to me. And it's not that I dislike the dragon thing. It's just that it's been so many at this point that I'm excited to get something different. So we defeat Ashara. She crumbles into dust, and Yune says she's leaving as well because the goddesses have always failed you. So we're just both going to go. But Ike tells Yune that the goddesses give people inspiration to grow beyond what they are. And without that, they might as well just be statues. Yune promises to try one more time as people all over the world are turned back from stone and the war is over. All right, let's talk characters real quick, and then we'll do epilogues and wrap this up.
Yep, sounds good.
So you get access to a couple more characters here. I think Tellius is an awesome character that you get to play as. I know you didn't get to use him. I'm really glad Oliver came back, and it's crazy to me that he's playable in this.
Yep, that's pretty weird.
I love it, though. It's fun to use Prince Kurthnaga and Nasala. Like, really love those two.
Yeah, Nasala is a lot of fun.
Stefan comes back in this part, too. And I've always thought he was really cool, but it sucks to me that he comes back so late. Sonichi, it was cool to use. Skirmir, King Kangas, like, everybody's really cool to use. It bums me out that Enna and Nasir you get at the end of the game again.
Yep. You barely get to use them.
Yes, and they have 2 games now that they've been in, and you still barely get to use them.
Yep.
This bothers me a little bit.
Understood, because they don't really have that much of a... They're made to be big characters, but then you only get to play with them for like 2 battles. And then their movement's kind of slow, so getting them even to be involved in the battles is difficult.
You're so right. It's one of their characters that I use because lore-wise, I'm like, this is cool that I can do this. But yeah, practicality-wise, it's not super practical.
Volk is one of my favorites, so I was happy to have him back too.
Yeah, I thought he was really neat. I also thought it was super awesome that Laron or Sephirin joins you. Even if it's only for the final battle. I still think that was a really nice touch, and I'm glad that that's a possibility.
I thought Gareth was like one of the more random, like bizarre things.
He's like Kaiser. And I'm glad he joins us because if Degencia was like, take the remaining survivors and go, and Gareth just stayed there, I would have thought that was weird. So I'm glad he's playable and like he's here, because they've clearly got his model done. Like, it was probably really easy to do, but he's definitely a kind of random inclusion.
Yep. It's just like, here's now for something completely different.
That's kind of how I felt about Gifka, though, as well, in Path of Radiance, that when they let you choose a royal to use at the end of that game, they have Tabarn, Nisala, or Gifka. And I remember the first time I played that and I got there, I was like, who is Gifka? And like, now we've had time to like sit with him and we kind of know who he is as the advisor to King Kangas or whatever. But yeah, back then I had sort of the same feeling of like, who is this guy? All right, you ready for epilogues and wrap up?
Yep, let's wrap this sucker up.
All right. We still got a little more to go with the epilogues, but the end of Ike's story, we get the character endings. And I'm not going to go through all those because that would be ridiculous. But there's a couple I wanted to go through that people may not know about or may not see. If you want to just know all the character endings, you can look up a video of those. So the end of Ike's story has him seeing stability return to the land. So he leaves on, quote, a journey to lands still unknown. He was never seen again. And depending on supports, either Soren or Ranulf goes with him. How do you feel about that as an end for Ike?
Like, I get it. Kind of burns the bridge on other potential stories, but that's okay.
Here's where I have to ask, do you want spoilers for other Fire Emblem games?
I know that there's other stuff that happens. Fringely involves Ike, but...
Do you want me to talk about that here? I'd like to talk about it to our audience, but you can take your headphones out for this one if you would like. Or...
I don't care about spoilers.
Okay.
So, say your will.
All right. I do wish he would have ended up with Alencia. To me, that's like where he should have ended. But we do know that he found it. He found something. Because in the game Fire Emblem Awakening, and there's going to be some spoilers here for Fire Emblem Awakening. So if you haven't played that one or you're interested in it, just skip ahead a tiny bit. But in Fire Emblem Awakening, there is a character named Priam who shows up. And he looks a lot like Ike with much longer hair. He's a bit of a ruffian, and he carries this cracked, like, super rundown version of Ragnell. And so he is, I guess, Ike finally did settle down with someone and had kids. And this is Ike's descendant. So I think it's really, like, I still would prefer him settling down with Alencia over this, but it's really cool to me. His line does keep going. I mean, Priam is now one of my favorite characters in Awakening because I love these games so much. But it's also really cool to me that I like the idea of every Fire Emblem game being tied in to the same timeline. And I know that we haven't gotten an official one like the Zelda timeline or anything, which I'm sure another Zelda podcast, shout outs to them, have gone over a ton. But maybe we should do one day for Fire Emblem or something, because there's lots of speculation. And I don't know if anybody's put out my timeline that I have in my head for everything, but it's cool to me that like Awakening clearly happens after the Tellius games and all of that's still involved. So that ends Awakening spoilers. I'm gonna get back to Path of Radiance or Radiant Dawn. Since many won't ever see it, Tellius gets his own epilogue where he apologizes. He goes to find Almedha, which is the queen of Dane. What's his name? Ashnard's wife. And he apologizes to her for not being her real son. And then he abdicates the throne. He gives up the throne and serves in the court instead.
Isn't Soren like her real son?
Yes, I was going to get to that right now.
Oh.
So to find that out, you must be on New Game Plus. Soren must attack Micaiah in Part 3, Chapter 7. You must spare Tellius. Soren must then fight Tellius in Part 3, Epilogue. Tellius must then fight Sephirin in Part 4's Epilogue, Part 4, when you fight Sephirin. Soren and Tellius must both survive to the end of the game. If you do all of that, you get an additional conversation at the end where Ike, Almeida, and Kurth Naga are talking. Ike tells them he wishes them well on their journey back to Goldoa or to Dane, and Almeida is very confused as he walks away because Tellius told her she had to meet Ike, but she wasn't sure why he insisted so much. As she turns to leave, she sees Soren, and she doesn't tell him, but she talks with Kurth and tells him that she knows Soren is her true son. The conditions to see that scene are insane. It's sort of like we talked about in Path of Radiance, that there's a challenge mode, and you can unlock characters like Ashnard for use in that challenge mode. But to unlock Ashnard, you need to complete Path of Radiance 20 times.
Yep, same idea.
Yeah, to me, this was exactly... It's better, maybe, but it's very close to the same idea that I'm like, without guide. Like, let's pretend that we're going to play this exactly as the developers intended, without guides. How many times did you want somebody to play Radiant Dawn to fulfill all of these conditions, get to this spot, you know?
Yeah.
This is the kind of stuff that if Fire Emblem had been as big as it was, or as it is today, back in my day, we had rumors on the playground about like Master Hand or Sonic the Hedgehog being playable in Super Smash Bros. Melee. If Fire Emblem had been as big as it is now, this would have been one of those rumors that like Soren is secretly Ashnard's son. And to do that, you have to do all these things. And I would have been like, no, this is the same kind of thing. Like, you need to push the truck in red version to get Mew, or you need to kill 100 enemies in Cruel Melee in Smash Bros. Melee to unlock Sonic and Tails. Like, I would have totally called nonsense on this.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense, story-wise, that they'd be connected.
Yes, and
So
when
I
they're
like that.
when they're all standing together on screen, you can see it. I really like it as a twist because it's something that's just always been there. And I like that it's not a big deal at this point. Because it's like, that would have been huge in Path of Radiance, but we didn't know. You know, Dane is being ruled by Almeida. Ashnard is dead. It just doesn't really matter anymore. So the last one I was going to go over was that Sephiroth has an epilogue as well. Ashara is reformed, the goddess, the fusion between Yune and Ashara. So Ashara returns home and finds Laran waiting for her. And we don't really know where home is for her either. And she's like, how long has it been? Has it been like 500 years since I last saw you? And he says, it's been 1,200 years since we last met. And I find that really interesting because that means it's been a long time since even Radiant Dawn. And Laran says, unfortunately, the peace on Earth is on the verge of crumbling again. And he seems nervous to tell her, but Ashara says she won't be frightened again. As one born of the hopes of man, I shall protect this world. And she asks Laran to sing to her, which I assume is like one of these Galders, since the songs are very important symbolically throughout both Tellius games. And Laran says, you know, it's been so long, I can't really still... And she interrupts him and says, well, why don't we go out and sing together? And he says, yeah, we can do that. And so they leave and sing together. And the credits roll there, and you get to hear their song. And I thought that was really cool as well, sort of as like a promise that continues on. And I'm wondering, too, in the timeline where that is. You know, is that another Fire Emblem game they're going to try and help somehow in the background?
That'd be interesting.
My headcanon is that it is, and I don't know if it's one that exists already or if it's one that will exist later.
They become Sedith and Rhea.
I don't think so, but I'm actually not sure how Three Houses ties into all that yet, but I haven't finished it yet. So when I 100% Three Houses, I think I'll have a better idea of where I think it fits in, and I'll have to talk with people and see where they think. But that brings us to the end of the Tellius games, the Tellius duology. And my only misc note I had for this was I really like the narrator on the Overworld. I don't know how you felt about him, but it made it feel very official and like a guy is advising you on the War Council.
Yep, I thought that was cool.
So final thoughts on both Radiant Dawn and the series, is the the series of these two games as a whole.
So I liked Path of Radiance a lot better than this one. I like them both a lot. So like it's marginal difference, but it felt like there were a few things in this game where I was sort of like, okay.
Yeah,
Whereas,
I had a couple of those too, and I feel bad I didn't mention it before. It's weird to me too that like Berserkers are not a class in the game, so Largo loses an arm in between games and he's just not playable. That was just an interesting choice to me. And then we also didn't talk about your favorite coming back, Daniel.
the wonderfully useless blacksmith character that bears my same name in like moderate likeness. Anna is in this game also, which is interesting.
Yes, she's in Path of Radiance as well.
Yeah, it's just fascinating that maybe she's the hero of time. Like in another Zelda podcast, they can do an episode on other heroes of time, and they can have Anna be there.
I mean, she does seem to be in a lot of these places, but so what do you think about the Tellius series as a duology? Like, do you feel like I've been pretty clear this is my favorite Fire Emblem games, and I take them as one. And if I'm counting one, to spoil our RPG episode a little bit, our top 10 RPGs, this was my second favorite when I can only pick one from each series. Because I don't know, it might be my second favorite overall. I'm not sure. These games are extremely important to me, and I'm not saying that so like now you may trash them, but you can trash them if you want to. I'm just curious as to your thoughts. Like, do you feel like these are must plays? Do you feel like you have to play Radiant Dawn, or is Path of Radiance enough? You can stop there. Like, what do you think?
I would definitely not play Radiant Dawn without having played Path of Radiance.
I wasn't saying that because that's pretty obvious to me. Because if you try to start on Radiant Dawn, I mean, you're gonna be so lost.
Yeah, so I would definitely not start with Radiant Dawn.
Yeah, that's kind of why I take them as one though, because I'm like Radiant Dawn, as far as standing on its own, it does not.
No, not at all. It'd be worth checking out. I'm way more likely to go back and play Path of Radiance again than I would be to play this one again.
Radiant Dawn is a commitment.
But I enjoyed both of the games quite a bit. I probably enjoyed Radiant Dawn more for the continuation of the characters more so than some of the newer stuff it presents. Like seeing the characters come back was fun to me, more so than maybe like the plot was.
I agree.
Definitely worth playing, of course.
So I guess my final thoughts is I love these games. They're some of my favorites of all time. Ike is probably my favorite protagonist of all time, even though the community is definitely split on him. And I get why. I think the criticism of his character is fair. I don't know. These games just mean a lot to me. And that about does it for me. I'm hoping that one day we'll get another duology like this that really moves me in the same way, because we haven't yet. And it's not just that I worry that I'm nostalgic or something, and that's a big part of it. But Shadows of Valentia moved me a lot too, in a similar way. So it's not just nostalgia. Like I can still be. I know I can still get there.
Well, I guess that brings us to the end of the Tellius games. Thank you everybody for listening.
Yes, it was a long episode, I know, but it was really important to me to put all of my thoughts out there because I don't get to talk about this game that often. So if you listen to the end of to the very end of this, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for staying around.
We appreciate you.
And if you're interested, you can rate and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts. You can reach out to us at the Turn by Turn Pod on Twitter. We are on Instagram at the Turn by Turn Podcast. You can find me at McGarr Mentions on the Twitter. And where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter as well at Chris_Harkey.
Awesome. So reach out. Let us know what your favorite characters are from this one or what you thought of this one. And we'll definitely get back to you.
Yes, we definitely will. I could talk about this game for another bunch of hours if anybody wanted to. But maybe we could, I'd probably record that anyway if we wanted to make it a huge thing and do a behind the scenes featurette at some point.
Yeah, if you want more Radiant Dawn content or Path of Radiance, honestly, just let us know, and I'm sure Chris could record a 7-hour series on his own.
Maybe so. Probably not just by myself. I would need some guests, but
Well, I'll get some like rough cuts of me saying yep and yeah, and then you can just cut those in.
that is all I need. But I need the one random one too.
No. That's a horrible idea. I'll give you that audio as well.
Yep. Perfect. And lastly, if you want to see us cover some other games, make sure you stick around. We've got a lot more planned for the season. And if you really want us to talk about your favorite game, you should definitely let us know what that is. And we can either talk about it if we played it, or if not, we can get on that.
Sounds good. Until next time, everybody. Bye.
Bye.